Alright guys, so the last chapter that we're going to deal with is chapter 9, and it is all going to be about quadratics. We're going to be solving them, we're going to be graphing them. So the first one that we're going to look at is solving a quadratic equation by the square root property. So first thing is the standard form of a quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c, and it will be equals 0. That's how we're going to know that we're going to need to solve it. Now, by the square root property, what you will notice is that you'll be missing your b, or it's going to be in the x plus b parentheses squared equals k form. Okay, so either one of these two, you know that you're going to be using the square root property. Now, the square root property, if k is a positive number and x squared equals k, then x equals the square root of k, or x equals negative square root of k. So the solution set looks like this: negative square root of k, comma, square root of k. Alright? Or it can be written as plus or minus the square root of k. So whenever you have to take the square root, you've got to make sure and put the plus or minus. Okay, so solve each equation, write the radicals in simplified form. So if I have x squared equals 25, alright, if I'm using the square root property, I'm going to put in the square roots. So I got x equals, and then the square root of 25 is going to be plus or minus 5. Now, if you want to break it up and go x equals 5, or x equals negative 5, I'm totally fine with this. So you can either put it as this form, or if you want to, you could put it together, but just make sure you have that plus or minus. Okay, so the next one that we have is x squared equals 13. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to place in the square root on both sides. So we got x equals 13 is not a perfect square, nor can it be simplified, so we just got plus or minus the square root of 13. Alright, and then the last one that we're looking at is x equals negative 169, so we're going to put that square root in. So we get x equals, since we put the square root in, it's going to be plus or minus, and whenever we have a negative underneath the radical, hopefully you remember that that's an imaginary number. So we're going to have an I, and the square root of 169 is 13. So my answer would be plus or minus the square root, plus or minus 13i. So whenever you have a negative underneath this radical or the square root, you got to make sure and put an I with it. Let me show you another one. So if I have x squared equals negative, let's do negative 9. Alright, so I take the square root on both sides. So x equals plus or minus, because I put in the square root of 9 is 3. And then because there's a negative underneath the square root, I've got to put the I. The back of your textbook will say that the solution set for 9.1, if you have a problem like this, you're have no solution, but I want you to practice it like this because we've already done 9.4 in chapter 8. Okay, so let's make it real with some equations. Our goal is to get it into the x squared equaling some type of number. Then we can apply the square root property. So solve each equation, write the radicals in simplified form. So we have 2x squared minus 5 equals 35. So first thing that I would do to get x squared by itself is I would add 5 on both sides. So I got 2x squared equals 40, because 35 plus 5 equals 40. Next thing I'm going to do, got to get x squared by itself, so I'm going to divide by 2. And I get x squared equals 20, because 40 divided by 2 is 20. Now I'm going to take the square root on both sides. So I got x equals plus or minus. Now, square root of 20. 20 is not a perfect square, but we can find the factors. So the factors of 20 are 1 and 20, 2 and 10, and then 4 and 5. 4 is a perfect square, so I got the square root of 4 times 5. So my final answer would be x equals plus or minus square root of 4 is 2, square root 5. Again, if you want to separate the answers to do x equals 2 square root of 5 and x equals negative 2 square root of 5, you can, but this is completely fine for me. Pause the video and I want you to do B. Okay, so I have 3x squared minus 8 equals 88. First thing I notice is that I'm missing a b. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get into the form of x squared equals a number. First thing I'll do is I'll add 8 on both sides. So I get 3x squared equals 96. Got to get x squared by itself, so I'm going to divide both sides by 3. So x squared equals 32. Then I take the square root on both sides. So I get x equals plus or minus because I put the square root. Then I have to find my factors of 32. 1 and 32, 2 and 16, and then 4 and 8. My largest perfect square is going to be the 16. So I get 16 times 2. So x equals plus or minus square root of 16 is 4. Square root 2. Hopefully you did okay with it. So these problems, what you're doing is you have a missing b. Alright, now we're going to see it in a different form. So solving the quadratic equation in the form of a plus b parentheses squared equals k. Alright, so what this means is we already have some parentheses squared equaling some type of number. My goal is to get x by itself, so I'm going to use my square root property. So remember, when you put the square roots in, it has to turn into a plus or minus. And squares and square roots are opposites of each other, so we're just left with x minus 2. So again, we have to find for 32 the factors. So 1 and 32, 2 and 16, and then the last one is 4 and 8. My largest perfect square is 16, so the square root is 16 times 2. So I get x minus 2 equals plus or minus 4 square root 2. But remember, we got to get x by itself. So to get x by itself, we have to add 2 on both sides. So I get x equals 2 plus or minus 4 square root 2. Now, can I add these two together and subtract? No, because I have a radical here. So because I have that square root of 2, I can't combine like terms because they're not the same. So as far as I can take it is right here. So let's try another one. So I've got in parentheses 5x plus 1 equals 7. So first thing I want to do is I want to apply that square root property. So I'm going to take the square root on both sides. So I'll be left with 5x plus 1 on the left, plus or minus the square root of 7. Now, the reason why we can't find any factors of 7 is 7 is a prime number. So that means only 1 and 7 are multiples. So now what we have to do is we have to just try to get x by itself. So in order to get x by itself, we subtract 1 on both sides. So we're left with 5x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 7. Now we got to get x by itself, so we're going to divide both sides by 5. So we got x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 7 over 5. Check for triangle canceling. Nothing can cancel. That's as far as I can take it. Okay, now I want you to pause it and I want you to try this one for me. Okay, so I've got in parentheses 2x minus 4 squared equals 50. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the square root property. So I've got 2x minus 4 equals plus or minus. 50 can definitely be factored. 1 and 50, 2 and 25, 5 and 10. I'm going to use the 2 and 25, so this is 25 times 2. So I got 2x minus 4 equals plus or minus 5 square root 2. Got to get x by itself, so I'm subtract 4 on both sides. When I subtract 4 on both sides, I've got 2x equals negative 4 plus or minus 5 square root 2. Alright, then I'm going to divide everything by 2. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus 5 square root of 2 over 2. I check my triangle canceling. They don't cancel out, so this is as far as I can take it. Alright? I want you to try another one for me. We'll call it C. So for this one, it's going to be in parentheses x minus 3 squared equals 16. So pause it for a second and solve this one for me. Alright, so for both sides I'm going to take the square root. So I'm going to get x minus 3 equals plus or minus, since I put the square root in there, of 4. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 3 on both sides. So I get x equals 3 plus or minus 4. This one I do have to split up because I don't have a radical, so I've got x equals 3 plus 4, and I get x equals 3 minus 4. Therefore, one of my answers is going to be 3 plus 4, which is 7, and then 3 minus 4, which is negative 1. So that's why I wanted to do a problem like this, because if they can clean up, you better clean them up. So if they don't have a radical or a square root, when you're working your way down, you got to make sure and clean it up. Alright, I got 2 more problems for you, and then we'll be done. So pause it, try this one for me. Okay, so I got 2 plus 1 parentheses squared equals negative 25. I take the square root on both sides. So I get 2x plus 1 on the left. Then because I put the plus or minus, or the square root, I've got to put plus or minus, and then the square root of negative 25 is 5i. Next thing I got to do is subtract the 1 on both sides. So I got 2x equals negative 1 plus or minus 5i. Then I'm going to divide by 2. So x equals negative 1 minus 5i over 2. I look for triangle canceling, nothing cancels. Ooh, should be plus or minus 5i, sorry. Alright, and the last one I have for you is 2x minus 5 squared minus 180 equals 0. So it's not technically in that form, but there's one step that you can do to make it get into that form. Alright, so pause it and do this one for me. Okay, first thing I want to do is I want to add the 180 on both sides. So I got 2x minus 5 parentheses squared equals 180. Take the square root on both sides, so I got 2x minus 5 equals plus or minus. Then the factors of 180, I'll do that right here. So that's 1 and 180, 2 and 90, 3 and 60, 4 and 45, 5 and 36, 6 and 30, 9 and 20, 10 and 18, and 12 and 15. So 9 is a perfect square, 36 is a perfect square, 4 is a perfect square. I think that's it. My largest one is 36. So I got 36 times 5. So I got 2x minus 5 equals plus or minus 6 square root 5. So I add 5 on both sides. So I got 2x equals 5 plus or minus 6 square root 5. Then I divide by 2, and I get x equaling 5 plus or minus 6 square root 5 over 2. And that is as far as I can take it. Okay? So that's 9.1. So now what I need for you to do is I need you to knock out this homework assignment. Make sure that you show all work. And remember, you're either going to be missing your b from your quadratic equation, or it's going to be x plus b parentheses squared equals some type of k. Alright. If you have any questions, make sure you bring them to class. Thank you.